Lilias Trotter had the opportunity to become one of England's greatest painters.
I think Lilias is an iconoclast. She defied all the categories.
If she's as good as I think she is, why has nobody else heard of her?
Ruskin was one of the most important men of the 19th century.
I don't think that he believed that he couldn't win her. Did she make the right decision, or did she make the worst decision of her life?
December 31st, 1895. Sunset is coming on with wonderful effects of light and colour. As the sun sinks, they deepen and glorify beyond any possibility of putting on paper. How the angels must watch when that light reaches a new spot on this earth that God so loves.
Lilias Trotter was an artist. She was a British writer. She was contemplative and she was visionary. Lilias was born in 1853 into the home of a distinguished West End family in London. We do know that her mother identified in her early an artistic talent. There were a lot of artists in the family. She had this amazing ability to capture quickly images, but she was already developing an eye to record things, but she clearly had this great spirit of just receiving beauty and perceiving it in a way that was extraordinary. It's recorded that when she first sighted the Alps, she burst into tears. The beauty so overcame her. But life changed enormously for her when at the age of 12, her father died. There seemed to be a distinct turning to faith after her father's death. That she was seeking a comfort of her heavenly Father in the absence of her earthly father. In 1876, Lilias and her mother went to Venice. Soon after checking in, her mother heard that John Ruskin was also residing at the hotel. Ruskin was the leading arbiter of art for the Victorian age. Lilias's mother worked up her courage and wrote a note.
Her mother was probably hoping that she would get some instruction in drawing and some general commendation from Ruskin. I doubt that she was expecting much more than that, although there would obviously have been the excitement of personal contact with one of the most famous people in the English-speaking world, which is what he was. John Ruskin is enormously important to the history of culture in the 19th century. His writing in prose is some of the greatest in the English language.
He was a writer about art, literature, architecture, and the natural world. Ruskin was one of the most important men of the 19th century and went on to influence almost everybody's life in the 20th century.
Ruskin made a famous statement, there is no wealth but life. What is wealth if we don't have quality of life, if we don't think about the fresh air around us, if we don't think about the landscape?
Ruskin became an authority whose opinion was always to be taken seriously.
He managed to create, if you like, a vision of life which inspired just generations of people. He was a true celebrity of the 19th century.
In his lectures in Oxford in 1883, which were published under the title of The Art of England, rather remarkably, he tells the anecdote of meeting Lilias Trotter, whom, of course, nobody in Oxford had heard of. One minute, Ruskin is talking about famous contemporary painters, and the next minute he's mentioning this young girl that he met in Venice. Certainly, as the story's told, Ruskin is a bit, sort of surly about this and thinks, oh gosh, what's this going to be? But actually, clearly, he responded to something in these watercolors, and he said that they lacked knowledge, but in a sense that he could sense the spirit, behind them. And he asks the mother whether he can take her out sketching with him.
I think he could see in Lilias the possibility of adding another woman to the relatively small list of serious women artists of the period, and he would have wanted to encourage her.
He's deliberately challenging the conventional understanding of what great art actually is, if you like.
Come and look. These coloured pages are with one and the same intent, to make you see. Many things begin with seeing in this world of ours.
Looking at her work, it's an example of someone finding a distinctive voice as an artist, having taken her up as a protégé. He's really very effusive about her. He says that she seemed to learn everything the instant she was shown it, and ever so much more than she was taught. One could see from her journals that she had a knack for combining image and text, but also of developing a way of drawing landscape, flower studies, and even drawings of people. One soon comes to realize, if you see something like this over a period of time, that this can only be by Lilias Trotter. And establishing that kind of distinctive voice is really quite a considerable achievement for a relatively little-known artist. And he actually said, for more than 25 years of my life, I would not believe that women could paint pictures, and all history seemed to be on the side of this conviction. But I was wrong in this established conviction of mine: women can paint.
What began as a modest interest became a passion pushing me forward in the search for Lilias. Now, this is the day before search engines. It was through post and through phone that eventually led me across the ocean to England to search out museums and archives. A search that led me in many, many different paths, really over almost a 3-decade span of time. And I will agree that there was an obsessive quality about it that concerned some of the people closest to me.
I can't imagine anyone else knowing more about Lilias Trotter than Miriam. We'd be getting ready for bed, and I'd say, now, am I with Miriam or Lilias?
I wanted to think being a minister's wife didn't make me different than anyone else. But the fact is my life was greatly impacted by the vocation my husband had. And so there was a sense in which, in my early years, I was very isolated with little children, and I discovered that I could travel outside my confines through books and through art. And I can remember just saving that little space when a child was taking a nap or at the end of the day and get a cup of coffee, and this would be my Lilias time. Looking at this little white book with gold lettering, Lilias Trotter of Algiers, and just the opening sentence.
Take the very hardest thing in your life, the place of difficulty, outward or inward, and expect God to triumph gloriously in that very spot. Just there, He can bring your soul into blossom.
I just had chill bumps go through me when I looked at this. The art came straight through my mind into my heart. This was the beginning, for me, of the discovery of Lilias. I was determined to pursue to the very end of my ability to find out who this woman was. If she's as good as I think she is, why has nobody else heard of her?
There lies before us a beautiful possible life. One with a passion for giving that shall be poured forth to God, but spent out for man.
It's well known that Ruskin had an eye for young women of intelligence, dedication, a good Christian with quite a talent for art, but also in a way biddable to his will in being able to push them in the directions he thought might be useful. Lilias fitted all the requirements.
She was clearly a very quick pupil. From that point on, he draws her into his circle.
It's hard to appreciate what that could have meant for her to be being coached by the master. I don't know how we could even parallel that in our own lives, but it was not only a significant moment for her, but it was the beginning of a very deep and rich friendship.
Ruskin has said, and I believe it true, the greatest thing a human soul ever does in this world is to see something and tell what it saw in a plain way. Hundreds of people can talk for one who can think, but thousands can think for one who can see.
There's a practice of looking and trying to understand your surroundings on a daily basis that was simply natural to both Lilias and Ruskin. It may have been encouraged and developed by Ruskin, but it was probably there in Lilias's work to begin with. like Ruskin, she appreciated that a flower, an insect, a landscape is all, again, part of divine creation. And by looking at it, and especially by drawing at it, one comes to understand it more.
It's looking at the world with such intensity that you not only see how beautifully and precisely it's made, if you like, the scientific view of nature, but you also begin to see the meaning that it has for you in terms of your own personal spirit, your soul, by virtue of the intensity with which you experience it.
The true ideal flower is the one that uses its gifts as a means to an end. The brightness and sweetness are not for its own glory. They are but to attract the bees and the butterflies that will fertilize and make it fruitful. For it is more blessed to give than to receive.
Ruskin's love of fidelity to nature has quite a complicated background. It has partly to do with moral ideas of truth. And of course, in looking at nature, you're looking at divine creation. And in the way in which he wrote and spoke, as it were, from the pulpit, he had the same kind of standing as a church leader. However, on a personal level, he was always a difficult man. Geniuses always are. They tend to lead very odd lives because they are out of the ordinary.
When he bought Brantwood in 1872, Ruskin was trying to escape celebrity that they created around him, became something almost of a burden. And he needed, particularly for his own personal sanity, to retreat to the countryside, somewhere quiet, where he could continue to work, and also where he could reconnect with nature, because at the heart of his writing, getting back to nature was always a really important part of it, understanding, if you like, where we come from. Visitors who could actually come and stay in Brantwood itself were very few and far between. So it's interesting that Lilias did stay. She was here with Ruskin in the place that was most precious to him. So it must have been incredibly exciting for this 20-something-year-old girl to come to a house like this, surrounded by people who are painting and writing. When Lilias would come to Brantwood, she stayed in what's known as the turret room these days. It's a small bedroom on the corner of the building. She'd have woken up into this wonderland, really, of looking out upon the lake and the mountains here. And that must have been an inspiring and beautiful start to anybody's day.
This was definitely a relationship that was the mentor to the student. But there's also the sense that there was a bond that was deeper than art. The most tantalizing and yet frustrating aspect of my search, bar none, were the missing letters that Ruskin wrote to Lilias. That begins a search that has been going on for 2 decades. When I began to pursue Ruskin scholars to see if I could find anything out about Ruskin and Lilias, they were welcoming anything I could tell them. Lilias was a missing piece in Ruskin research. I can't even tell you the effort and amount of time that I spent and the leads that were followed, and they all came to a dead end. There were so many other people who'd searched for me. The friends that helped me try to track down these letters were critical.
I was thinking about Miriam's obsession earlier with Lilias Trotter, and I had this image suddenly of a terrier that just goes down that rabbit hole, determined to get the prey. If Miriam had not spent 30 years researching Lilias Trotter, she would have been forgotten. I think lost to the sands of time.
Miriam had shared with us that she had taken the project as far as she could take it, but there were things that she wished would happen, that it could go further.
I did share that I had one unfulfilled dream, and that was to find those letters that Ruskin wrote.
She knew they existed. It was an obsession, looking for these things, and it takes obsession to doggedly look and look and look.
I checked my email, and up comes Sally's email saying the letters have been found. So now that network of detectives have come together in this wonderful moment. Just the few letters that I've looked at start out with "Darling Lilias," "You darling Lilias."
Where are you to be this summer? Write again directly, please. I can't at all tell you how lovely I think your drawing. You show great gain in landscape power in these last two books. I pause to think how I can convince you of the marvelous gift that is in you. My dear child, you must come and see me. I can show you many little things in no time. And besides, I want to thank you for praying for me. Ever affectionately, your John Ruskin.
So we have now Lilias growing as an artist. We have this relationship that clearly was of all importance to her. But there was a challenge because there were some other things entering into her life. There was kind of a movement taking place, a spiritual awakening among London society.
She's in a very intense religious culture, which was developing both spiritually and in terms of practical mission work, responding to the conditions of the poor, both in the inner city in London.
This was a time when the fledgling YWCA was just getting off the ground, and it was really meeting needs. Lilias's heart was definitely drawn to the poor of London, and particularly to the women. She did things that were actually very dangerous. She would go down to the Victoria Station, and she would minister to the prostitutes and try to get them off the streets and into a place where they could have good food and shelter, but also be trained in respectable, marketable skills.
There are one or two references in his letters where he seems to admonish Lilias for spending too much of her time on good works in London, helping the poor and disadvantaged.
I want to see you and scold you, and I've got a cough and no voice to do it. But if you could come out here to be scolded, I think I could manage it in a feeble manner. and it would do my heart good. So do you ever go to see people, except naughty people?
He's being playful.
He's
there,
being playful.
but he's also
yes, and
turning the screws.
I don't think he's being entirely serious. Ruskin did have a terrific sense of humour. He is perhaps expressing annoyance that she hasn't written for some time, but he's over-egging it and I think playing a kind of word game with her as well. He goes on, all
Very fine, helping the station girls. But what will you think of yourself someday, I wonder, for your neglect and contempt and defiance and tormenting and disappointing and ignoring and abjuring of me? I'm bad enough to be gone and seen to, I'm sure. But you won't.
I think that's probably simply because she could have been spending that time on her art, whereas others could do the other good works who didn't have the talents that she did.
It did raise eyebrows that a woman, especially of her breeding, didn't just mingle with, but embraced people of a far lower estate and in terrible, terrible conditions. I think a lot of people thought she was risking her own safety and her own health to be doing this.
She had a heart of love, and it was a love that transcended any kind of social, economic barrier. Ruskin saw that and admired it, and he encouraged that, but he was beginning to see this as in competition with her art. And of course it was. This was brought to a point of crisis. She's there at Brentwood with John Ruskin. He put to her what her future could be.
Ruskin says I could be England's greatest living painter, that I could do things that would be immortal. Please understand that it is not from vanity that I tell you, at least I think not, because I have no more to do with my gifts than with the color of my hair, but because I need prayer to seek God's way more clearly.
She understands what he's offering her, and it's speaking to something she loves. She now had the great crisis of her life, and that crisis was, what is the role of art going to be in my life?
It seems as if I'd lived years in just those few days. At first, I could only rush about in the woods, as if in a dream. Since then, it's been an almost constant state of suffocation, half intoxication, so that I can hardly eat or sleep, except by trusting the Lord about it.
There's no way to overestimate the crisis of soul. It all came to that moment that she knew she had to decide.
I see as clear as daylight now. I cannot give myself to painting in the way that he means, and continue still to seek first the kingdom of God.
When she said no to Ruskin, she was turning her back on the possibility of fame and embracing obscurity. It's a very rare thing to do. to turn down the kind of renown she might have known and the praise of the society that she was really a part of in order to do something that garnered no praise at that time, no fame, almost the promise that that would not happen, is almost perverse in its willingness to renounce what most people value.
One has to admire Lilius's determination and drive to do what she did. She obviously had the confidence and the determination to pursue her own path.
She did not necessarily feel that the choice she made was something that another person would have to make. It was simply a very, very personal thing that she believed this is what God wanted her to do, and this is what she wanted to do as well. She made a decision that almost broke her, but with a complete independence of soul that is the result of a spirit that's been released. There was a certain amount of torment for him to see the course she was taking, and his heart was broken. After her decision was made, she returned to London with renewed zeal. Her life in service just flourished. Lilius had that rare ability to look around and see a need. And one of the things that she saw was the conditions for the working women. There was no public place that they could eat. For the woman, the working woman, she was forced to eat her lunch from a paper bag on the sidewalks. Lilius saw the need to address that. And so she was instrumental in forming the first public restaurant for women in London.
Her passion was to reach out to the downtrodden. She used all of her imagination to create environments for these people where they could be treated with respect and as worthy human beings.
In all the withholdings of this year, God has been opening a door where he closes a window.
She continued with her art, and she continued to go up and visit Ruskin, and he continued to complain. Okay, that's where we are. So now he sees his lovely Lilius wasting her beautiful gift. Here he says, the sense of color is gradually
getting debased under the conditions of your life. The greys and the browns in which you now habitually work, technically you are losing yourself. Darling Lilius, I am beginning to think of packing your drawings up. I've examined them well, and they really are, as I've said, wrong in grave respects. Chiefly in want of sunshine. But there's also real vulgarity in the way you put light things against dark to bring them out.
There's a wonderful letter that he wrote to her where he asked why it is that he can't see her so much. What is he missing?
You never noticed that you left me extremely sorrowful. Can you come again today, any hour?
It's like a cross between a rejected lover and an Italian mother saying, when are you going to come see me?
Yes. I don't think that he really believed that he couldn't win her. And the fact that she kept meeting with him and painting and all those good things were still happening, he held out hope. But clearly, the rudder of her will was headed in a different direction. There was kind of a movement taking place, a spiritual awakening. The who's who of London were attending these Bible studies. And this was not a movement that stayed with the inner person. It resulted in reaching out. There was a quickening in Lilius's heart to this. This was formative. Something was taking place in her life that came so quietly that when the moment of decision came, there was almost an inevitability about it.
I attended a mission meeting in London when at the close, someone stood up and asked, "Is there anyone in this room whom God is calling for North Africa?" "It's me," I said, rising. "He's calling me."
My name's Sue. I'm working on the archives of some of the early mission work in North Africa. And I just think it's very good to discover that there was a band of women, single women, who felt that God was calling them to go and serve him overseas. At a time when, yes, it was quite a thing for a single woman to do.
Now, the plot thickens a bit here because then she applied to North African missions and they turned her down for health reasons.
She wasn't physically strong. She wrote in her diary, "No doctor would have passed us fit for this work. If God wanted weakness, he had it."
At sunrise, the first peaks of land came into sight, dim and purple. The lights of Algiers.
Lilius Trotter had the opportunity to become one of England's greatest painters. Did she make the right decision, or did she make the worst decision of her life?
To go into an obscure and dangerous land really is a wild choice. It's especially for a woman at that time. It's almost unimaginable. It's difficult to do today.
Here were these three women, and you'd almost say they were clueless. They found a home in the Kasbah, which would be the old city, and by many considered the slums. They hardly knew what they were doing or where to go. They did not know a person in Algiers. They did not speak a word of Arabic. In many ways, they were very ill-equipped from a personal point of view. Lily was brought up to have a servant awaken her in the morning with a cup of tea. They sort of marveled in their ability to do these things on their own.
She was really turning her back on everything that was familiar and everything that was comfortable. She didn't really know exactly what she was going to find over there, the challenges. I mean, clearly, she couldn't have imagined the cultural differences.
Oh, we do so long to speak Arabic. The power of talking can only come by being among the people.
Lilius kept an almost daily record in diaries and journals of her life in Algeria. What's so amazing about this record is not only is it a written record, but it's a visual record, sketches, and there were photographs documenting stories of adventure and the amazing stories of her life in North Africa. Lilius's first contact with the people in the Kasbah was through the children. Her joy was complete when she could wake up in the morning and go out in the streets and talk to the people. There were parapets on their windows that she could actually reach out and touch the hands of somebody on the other side. Her early years was establishing a base in Algiers and also drawing people to that ministry, providing classes for children, for women. Her heart was very much with those women and became involved in their struggles. The role of the woman was not a very pretty thing in this culture at that time. The women would come to her with their stories. She saw that girls were in their father's house until they were marriageable at the ages of 10 and 12. And then they were in their husband's harem and then discarded for younger wives. And so many of them lived lives of great destitution. And she became concerned that they have some kind of economic independence, to be able to stand on their own and apart from their fathers or the fate of their marriage. And really, this wasn't being done at that time. She even had a person come who was skilled to teach them this. And during that time, she not only pioneered ministries, but she pioneered methods of reaching people that scholars today will say were 100 years ahead of her time. It was not a big movement to help to rescue battered women. It was simply a person responding to need and providing some love and some comfort and safety.
I said to a sad-eyed woman, "You love that little girl?" "Yes," she answered. "I am a widow, and she is my eyes." "That is the way God loves you," I said.
These were women who so responded to the love that Lilius gave them. She became Lala Lily, their loving Lilius.
One Arab lady leaned out from her upstairs window and spoke to an Arab lady across the sort of narrow corridor, and she said, "Nobody ever loved us like this. Nobody ever loved us like this."
June 8th, 1896. The village lay silent in the sunlight, and a woman glided out of the door and asked what I wanted. I answered that I loved the Arabs and had come to talk to her. Immediately, she led me through dark, twisting passages. Then, one by one, a dozen women gathered. I don't think they'd ever seen a European woman in close quarters before. Later, one of the women asked, "Why do you not stay? Why do you not come and live with us?"
What are these women to do in a country that was a French colony that resented English people, coming to the Arab Muslim world that resented Christians?
January was one of the darkest and toughest months we've ever had. One literally could do nothing but pray at every available moment. Still, the light does not come. Just a blind holding on to a dim Christ.
From the earliest days in Algeria, she longed to go beyond the plains and into the desert.
Almost from the day she arrived, I would say, Lilias had her eye on the far horizon.
Looking on and on, the desert stretched away like a great sea. One looks and feels as if in a dream. The desert is lovely in its restfulness. Everything is so full of God. One does not wonder that he used to take his people into the desert to teach them. September 6th, 1899. The next day was a battling on in simple endurance through a blinding blizzard of sand. Every trace of footprints had been swept away, and the track was invisible as we journeyed on.
I really was grappling with, was it worth it? She could, in a way, have it all. She began to develop relationships with people in the Southlands. She found a group of mystics that she felt were seriously looking for God. To know Lilias' story, you have to know the bond that she established between the Sufi mystic brotherhood. She had such admiration for them, as she felt this particular group of people in this particular geographic area were true seekers after God. She totally related to them as they sought the way. And they invited her, and this was almost unprecedented, for them to invite somebody into their brotherhood. And a woman, no less. And they would tell each other their stories of faith.
She sensed in them a journey to try and find the heart of the mystery, trying to penetrate to the depths of the mystery of God.
In many ways, Lilias is a role model of what it is to interact with the culture, to respect it, to honor the people, and to value them, and to see herself as learning from them. And so that it wasn't me bestowing my goodness upon you, as much as us coming together and coming alongside and learning from them even as they learned from her. I do know that her friends say that her mother was disappointed that she gave up perhaps options for marriage and pursued a course of life that was radical. It's interesting to me to note that she did not go to Algeria until after her mother's death.
My dearest Lilias, I asked you a grave question 2 years since or thereabouts. You said you must pray over it, and never answered a word. Ever, your much enduring J.R.
See, the colleagues of Lilias claim to know firsthand that John Ruskin offered his hand in marriage to Lilias. Now, whether he ever would have delivered on that, had she ever accepted that, we'll never know.
Whether he saw potential marriage partner in Lilias is hard to determine. This is all we have, you see.
Whether she had the view that to be wholly devoted to the Lord and the work that he'd given her to do, she had to remain single or not, I don't know. And she doesn't say, and I wouldn't want to speculate. But one never has the impression with Lilias Trotter that this was a lack or anything she perceived as a lack. Her life was full and rich.
Probably at present the only person likely to help me in my chief difficulties and lost ways. So please, think much of what I told you, and follow on your own path happily the light I cannot find. Ever affectionately. Write as often as you can. J.R.
As late as 1899, the very last year of Ruskin's life, she sent him a book of hymns. I got this book of verses to send you
some weeks ago. It has been full of light and blessedness to me, and I have such a feeling that it will have some ray for you that I can't help sending it. Always yours, with grateful and loving memories, Lilias Trotter.
The thing that dogged me most was the thought that she'd given up her art.
Oh, how good it is that I have been sent here to see such beauty. There is a peculiar loveliness about the art of saints, and a peculiar joy. For the artist, more than other men, has the power in forgetting himself in what he sees.
She understood the written words took on value by their beauty. The longer she was in North Africa, I think the more she began to think in parable. She writes, a bee
comforted me very much this morning, concerning the desultoriness that troubles me and our work. He was hovering among some blackberry sprays, just touching the flowers here and there. Yet all unconsciously, life was left behind. Today's first lesson was in these little mountain paths. I followed mine only a few yards further this morning, and such an outburst of beauty came. You can never tell to what untold glories a little humble path may lead if you follow far enough. I am now ready to be offered. Measure thy life by loss, not by gain. Not by the wine drunk, but by the wine poured forth. For love's strength standeth in love's sacrifice, and he who suffers most has most to give.
When you see the diaries with the tiny illustrations and realize that those were for no one but herself, she was pouring out her heart. I think it would have delighted Ruskin's color-loving heart to have seen all those wonderful paintings of sky and flowers and people in the wonderful colors that he encouraged. My feeling about her art, it wasn't lost in Algeria. If anything, it was fed. This quality that drove her and made her do some incredible things had a flip side to it. I admire going to the limit, but actually that was an area in her life I think that was also a weakness, that she did not know when to stop. Repeatedly, she would work to the limit and then completely break down physically. It was a climate that tested the strongest of men, and many people left that area because they couldn't withstand it physically. There were definitely the issues of health, fatigue. One of the great sorrows was when the first person in their band died at a young age from typhoid. In reading her diaries, I felt her struggles and her humanity, an earthiness that's hard to convey in any other words but her own.
Our souls have felt the scorching breath. Nerves get overstrung in this climate in a way they never did before. And an exhaustion comes through the body to the spirit so vivid at times that the very air is full of the powers of darkness. How many of us have gone through the testing of every fibre of our inner life since we left England? And how many of us have had a bitter breaking down under these tests?
I know she had her doubts, I know she had her struggles, and I could feel the weight of that in her journal. Sometimes it was almost too hard for me to read on, feeling the heaviness of what she was dealing with.
Things still look dark and heavy all round. But when the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. It is better to wait for the torrents that will set life going. I am beginning to see that it is out of a low place that one can best believe.
What I see here is a woman who was so in tune with God that she could speak, even in the midst of difficulty, to an absolute abundant joy.
What most impressed me about her work in Algeria was the almost thankless nature of it, because so much of her vast energies were like water on the sand of the desert. It was just absorbed and seemed to disappear.
She dreamed and prayed for a church visible, and that didn't happen.
People to whom she really poured out her life turned on her or would leave, and yet she was so committed.
Before us all dawned a new horizon. A glory in its every hardness, and in the sense that we are working for the future and its coming day. We are dreamers, dreaming greatly.
In the Ashmolean Museum is a painting of a lily that John Ruskin took from Lilius's collection. The English lily thrived and was nurtured in that almost greenhouse condition. But there's also a lily that she painted, which is a desert lily, or the sand lilies. And the interesting thing about the sand lily is that it thrived in the harshest of conditions because it drew the nourishment from the bulb that had the stored energy within.
I think Lily is an iconoclast. I don't think she was hedged in at all by cultural boundaries, dictates. As a woman, as a Christian, as an artist, she defied all the categories.
I now see a sunset differently. In a sense, she's taught me a way of seeing. She herself said to the end of her life that she would feel the ache of not having completely developed her artistry. Not so much when she wasn't painting, but when she did pick up her paintbrush and realize what more she could have done. What I saw in Lilius was just the idea of being faithful. Being faithful to what you believe is right. Being faithful to what you believe God wants you to do. And to not be concerned about the results. The adding up is not really ultimately ours to see. Who's to measure what is greatness? She, in the end, answered my own questions because she, to the end, felt the joy of her life. At the very end of her life, in this faint pencil, she's still scrawling sketches and images. At her deathbed, her friends gathered around and they sang together, "Jesus, Lover of My Soul," her favorite song. And then she looked out the window and she said, "A chariot and 6 horses." And someone said, "Are you seeing beautiful things?" And she said, "Yes."
Many, many beautiful things. This dandelion has long ago surrendered its golden petals and has reached its crowning stage of dying. The delicate seed globe must break up now. It gives and gives till it has nothing left. It holds itself no longer for its own keeping, only as something to be given.
station, Welbeck Street, for shelter and something to eat. She sells herself